Welcome, everyone. How are we feeling? I'm Megan Marshall. I'm the director of the QC Hyde Living Writers series. And this is our first in-person event in over 2 years. So essentially, many of us, I have not stepped foot in this room for 2 years. So this is kind of surreal and amazing and awesome and also a little bit terrifying. But you know, it's great to be back amidst all the atrocities ongoing in our world. You know, it's great that we can hold space together this evening here. And really, that's a beautiful thing and something that I definitely have missed. And I think a lot of people would agree that we've missed this. So thank you so much for being with us this evening. In regards to holding space, I do want to take a moment and read our land acknowledgement. For millennia, the Peña people have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State University community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony, and we find inspiration from the land of the Peña. I'd also like to take a moment and thank those who have helped to make this event and this series possible, and that includes Marco Tomlin, my fabulous co-host. Also, Daddy Mukahal, Laura Bliss, and Rebecca Williamson. I'd also like to thank the Department of English and Comparative Literature and instructionally related activities for their continued support of our series, and as well as Mikel Ramirez and our friends from Aztec Shops who are holding it down and selling books in the back. And so I've been waiting for over 2 years to say this. Please silence your cell phone if you haven't already done so. Because, you know, we're not automatically on mute when we enter this room. I appreciate y'all. Also, we are live streaming right now on Facebook. So if you want to like wave up your arm and say, hi, Facebook, what's up? Okay, but don't worry, basically, we're just the ones who can be seen. So don't worry. Okay. So it's a joy in and of itself just to be here again, holding space with y'all tonight. But we are overjoyed that we are now joined by 3 esteemed authors, scholars, and SDSU beloveds who are really helping us to usher back into our in-person space. So I'm just going to do like a very quick abridged intro for each author, and then they're going to come up and share an excerpt of their work, and then we're going to get a chance to ask them some questions. So I'm going to start with Chris Barron over here, who is an SDSU MFA program alum. He's also the award-winning author of 2 middle grade novels in verse, All of Me and Magical Imperfect, and the forthcoming novels, The Gray World and Forest Heart. He's a contributor to the Young Adult Anthology, Everybody Shines, and the author of Lantern Tree, which is a collective work of poetry from CityWorks Press, which is the winner of a San Diego Book Award. He's a professor of English at San Diego City College and the director of the Writing Center there. Dr. Lashon Daily is an assistant professor of English and Comparative Literature with a specialization in Black children's literature here at SDSU. Her book project, Black Girl Lit, The Coming of Rage Performances in Contemporary U.S. Black Girlhood Narratives, 1989 to 2019, charts how children's literature, film, television, and social media has helped shape our cultural understanding of what it means to be young, Black, and female in the U.S. She's the recipient of the Emily Chamberlain Cook Prize in Poetry and the Mark Goodson Prize for Distinguished Artistic Talent, among many other honors. Her children's book, Mr. Okra Sells Fresh Fruits and Vegetables, was released in 2016. And then we have Matt Galapanya, also an SDSU MFA program alum, who is the New York Times Bestselling Newbery Medal-winning author of 7 young adult novels, including Mexican WhiteBoy, We Were Here, and Superman Dawnbreaker, and 6, although now I feel like it's more picture books, including Love and Last Stop on Market Street. In 2016, he was awarded the NCTE Intellectual Freedom Award, and in 2019, he was given an honorary doctorate from UOP. So how about a round of applause for all of our students? Barron's going to start us off with a little bit.
You know my stuff. Hold on. Well, I'm so happy to be here. I get a lot of like overwhelmed gratitude feelings at SDSU because I spent a lot of time in school here and also teaching here and just hanging out here. So reading through that right now. But I'm very thankful to all of you for being here. It's exciting to be at a live event with friends and to kind of share some of the work we're doing, and I'm excited just to answer questions and go through it. But I'll start by just talking a bit about the work I've done, because so much of it came from the MFA program, from being in the, I graduated in the late 90s, not that long ago, and have always been writing, but really focused on teaching. I love teaching. I always loved teaching, even in the program when I was teaching. I was writing, but then eventually got more serious about it, and I thought I would just share a little bit from Lantern Tree, 4 books of poems, which is actually a collective book of MFA alums. Another one is here right now, Galapanya. And I'm a big believer in writing what you know. I know that that's like almost cliche, like write what you know, but I think it's important because our stories are other people's stories. And we get to know each other, we understand each other, we find empathy when we learn each other's stories. And so for me, when we write books, when I'm writing books, I'm trying to write what I know best, but it doesn't take away the fiction part of it. It enhances it, right? So that's what my stories are about. In Lantern Tree, which I wrote a poem that actually was kind of the instigator of writing middle grade books later. So I thought I'd just share that one with you. This is a very serious confessional book. It's called Under the Broom Tree. That's part of Lantern Tree. It's got very deep poems about my identity and this kind of thing that a lot of us write as poets, which is good. And then in the middle of it, I wrote this kind of lighter poem. And I always give credit to Matt for this because Matt heard this poem when this book came out. This book came out in 2012. And he's like, you got to write middle grade. What's that? I knew what it was. So I wanted to start with this. First kiss. Fat kids don't have girlfriends. Friends, yes, but not kissing. Not even in 3rd grade. So imagine my surprise when once in the backseat of our 77 Caddy on the drive home from the birthday party, Tanya, her eyes quiet and mine, put her braid on my shoulder and kissed me. Like this. The first kiss struck my nose, then squarely she found my lips. The next day at school, I spent hours staring out the window, my shoulder bending in the memory of the braid, my fingers pushed against my mouth, trying to remember the cold suddenness of her lips and breath that made me. So out of that story, and some years later, I started writing this book, which is All of Me, which came out 2019. And it is a book all about this kid named Ari Rosenzweig, because the kid has been teased and bullied about his weight his whole life. And I think some of you have read this. But the summer between 7th and 8th grade, he decides to make a change, and with the help of his friends, he's kind of able to learn that the change is not what he thought it would be. I wanted to read a bit about this because this book is very close to my own experience, but of course fictionalized in so many parts. Who am I? The life in my head seems so different from the life outside, where I'm so big that everyone stares, but no one sees the real me. My name is Ari Rosenzweig, and this year I'm the newest 7th grader at Mill Valley Middle School. I have sandy brown hair and green eyes like my father's. I'm average height, but I'm a fat kid, and I hate it when people call me names. And even though I'm overweight, I can still do everything everyone else can. Right? I fight, play video games, but people just see me as different. Only notice who I am on the outside. My mother's an artist. Sculpts giants in clay, paints the world on canvas, on murals, even on clothes. My father sells what she paints. I'm an only child. Sometimes I get lonely, wish for a brother or sister, but I get so much time to myself to do what I want to do, and no one interferes. I make role-playing games. I'm going to be a cryptozoologist. I want to find the creatures out there like Bigfoot that might seem so different, but that belong to this world too. My mother says we're going to spend the summer at the beach. Out in nature, she says. I like the beach, but I don't like taking off my shirt. And I always have to pull up my pants. And I worry that there's not enough food because I'm always hungry. But more than anything, I think I want to make a change, but I don't know how. One of the core characters in this story is Lisa, and she's kind of this luminous friend who's very aloof to all the bullying and the things that happen in middle school. She's like, I don't care what they say, I'm going to be me. And so Ari really finds himself like a magnet to her. He's just really connected to her. And so he gets to spend some time with her, and she becomes a really important force in his life. This is a little bit poem about her. Her hands. On Thursday afternoons, after school, my mom teaches drawing classes at the Marin County Rec Center. The best part is that Lisa and her mom both go. Lisa's the youngest student, but my mom says she has a real gift. She paints the entire canvas without any fear. She just lets the colors explode wherever she wants, unafraid to get her hands dirty. Sometimes we all get dinner after class. Instead, our moms become friends, drink wine, and talk, while me and Lisa write stories and build worlds together. She loves vintage music, and I tell her about the old TV shows I like to watch. Once after drawing class, Lisa, with her long, wild blonde hair, her hands full of charcoal and paint, her torn jeans, her Def Leppard t-shirt, and her tall white boots, took my hand and walked me outside. What's it like having a mom like yours, she asked. My mom drinks all the time, Marie, all the time, even more after the divorce. But all I could feel was her hand, like it stretched itself over my whole body. I didn't know how to answer right away. I thought about telling her what I imagined she wanted to hear about art and studios and books everywhere, but being with her just made the truth come out. So I told her she smokes too much, yells all the time, and I never know what will happen next. I could see in her eyes she was looking for something, squeezing my hand tighter now, like she might squeeze even more truth out of me, a key to something I didn't know what to do. But this hand in my hand, I learned would unravel. And another theme that's really important in this book, that's close to mine, is that Ari is late for his bar mitzvah, and it's suddenly important to his parents. And he doesn't really know if it's important to him, but they're able to find a rabbi, kind of like even after the fact, which is very difficult. So this is a little bit about that. Elevate, arise, walk home. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu. I get it wrong every time, and I cry a little in frustration. Did you practice? The rabbi asks. Yes, I lie. The rabbi sits patiently in his overstuffed chair. He drones the blessings back to me. We start again. His office smells like honey and pipe tobacco and books. He shines at me from beneath the one lamp that he allows. I want to break out of here, but I like him, even though he's tough. Again, Art, elevate. What? You don't want to make your parents proud? I do. But what I really want is to jump on my bike, ride the Chrissy Field all the way to Fort Point, the Golden Gate. I want to feel my legs burn from riding. I want to bring my musketeers. Here, he says, let's record today. And he fumbles an old tape recorder. It's record and play at the same time. In a few months, I'll receive my aliyah, being called to the Torah of our mitzvah, where the rabbi will call me up and tell me to arise in front of his congregation and recite blessings and prayers. And when it's all done, according to tradition, I become a man. But I don't know if this can work. My dad says we're lucky to find a rabbi who would still help us. Most kids start years before they attend Hebrew school, take classes online, but my parents always seem too busy to get it going. Part of me hoped they might even forget. The more I learn about these traditions, how important they are, how intricate, the more nervous I get. After it's done, I need to observe all 613 mitzvahs. Feeding the poor, being kind to strangers, honoring my parents, so much responsibility. I remember my cousin's bat mitzvah, rhythmic prayers and unending songs and grown-up tears, but mostly I remember my cousin, Braiding in her cream-colored dress, her eyes filled with blue and white, a sudden and beautiful woman. Bright moonlight, party lights, fireflies in the grass, dancing in strobe lights with cousins and friends deep into the night. Games, hula hoop, hot potato, 1,000 dance contests, Coke and Pepsi, brisket, chopped liver, baskets of bread and chocolate rogola, near a counter filled with black and white cookies. My own Aunt Cookie and my grandparents at a long cedar table near the pond. The fireflies rose and doubled on the water. The grown-ups spent the evening there, speaking a secret language of hope and memory. They stopped each time a child passed to smile or pat a head, adjust a tie, wipe a mouth. I found my mother and father dancing, his left hand straight out, holding her hand tightly. They were looking at each other, in the black tuxedo and his silver gown underneath the starlight. And later on, I asked them if mine will be like this. Better, my father says, and he grabs my face. Better, you mensch. Again, Ari, the rabbi says, and I start again. I'll just read one from this. So this is my latest book, The Magical Imperfect, came out in June. And this is also a book of the heart. It is very much more complex. However, when I was writing this, so much of it came from my own life. It's the story of these two kids, Eitan and Malia. Eitan is selectively mute since his mother had to leave, and Malia, who wears this blanket, and the artist Andre Kaolin really captured the cover, on the cover of this blanket. She always wears it. She has really, really bad chronic eczema. She doesn't want to show her face at all. They are the grandkids of ancestors who came through Angel Island, which is actually kind of known as Ellis Island of the West. And so it's this community that formed, this fictional community that formed in south of San Francisco. And it's about their friendship and how these kind of unlikely friends get together. It's also about this kind of ancient magic that came from across the sea, from different cultures. And a little bit of like, what would it mean if ancient magic clashed with the modern world? Does it still have relevance or not? So let me just read you one poem from here. So Malia lives out in the Redwood Forest, and she likes to go there with her friends. This takes place in 1989 during the San Francisco earthquake, during that World Series between the Giants and the A's. So there are earthquakes happening during this time, and this is when one occurs. So she takes Eitan to this pool, the magic pool. We walk down a path, slow and winding. I hear water, a small stream at the bottom where the water spills into a small pool before it rushes on. Large stones rest on the banks. This is my favorite spot. She looks around. These are the sitting stones. This is where the trees listen the most. The pool is magical. We sit on the rocks and she hums. She holds a pomegranate up to her nose and breathes deeply. I try to see the magic in the pool. Bugs skim across its surface, and the sunlight glimmers on the water. Malia walks to the edge, dips her hand in, lets the water filter through her fingers. I'm not even supposed to go in the water. It dries my skin, but this water is magic. She stands and twirls so the blanket flies. One day I'll come here and wash away all the bad skin. Sunlight streams to the bottom of the pool. It's not very deep, and it's clear. I put my hand down to the bottom. It's clay. It's all clay, and I pull up the wet goop. Malia steps back laughing. It's not that magical. Don't get any on me. I think about my grandfather and the old treasure box in the shop and the jars of magic of clay from the Dead Sea and the Batalva River. Is all clay the same? Why is this clay any different? I let the clay drip from my fingers, wash off the rest in the cool water. The stream comes all the way from the mountains where they once found gold, she says. And then it flows all the way into the sea. It's a very, very old stream. Also up there.
Pleasure to be reading some of my creative work, especially since my students generally see me as an academic in the classroom, but I'm just so grateful to be sharing the stage with Chris and Matt. So I wanted to acknowledge that when I completed my MFA, my advisor told me to put my novel in the drawer for 10 years
And then if I felt the need to come back to it, that's when I should come back to it. And I did that very thing. So in the faith, do not be afraid to put your pieces away and come back to it. In that time, I left New York, I moved to New Orleans, I wrote a children's book, I got my PhD where I was able to actually study about girlhood. So I definitely just didn't want to write about being a girl. I wanted to actually study the research behind girlhood. And as some of my students know, I'm very, very interested in gathering more girlhood study scholars, but now it's been interesting to come back to this piece as someone who has studied about girlhood, now writing about girlhood. I also wanted to read two separate pieces about what it means to have the same story told in two different genres. So I'm going to read it from the young adult version first, and then you will see how I place it into a children's picture book, obviously with a different voice, right, a different tone, but the same story. So the young adult novel version is called Wuthering Andrew. On August 24th, 1992, a massive hurricane demolished many parts of Miami, Florida. Its name was Andrew. We were living in the Grove then, in that small corner house at the intersection of Bird Avenue and McDonald Street, the same house that holds most of my memories of my father and his death. There were 6 of us seeking shelter that night in our one bathroom. Thea and I shared the tub while Cal, Kian, and Milky sat on the floor. Mom sat on the toilet seat reading from the Bible by candlelight. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High, we repeated after her in unison, our voices timid with the echo we created off of the thin walls. Shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty, Mom said, anticipating our voices to follow. And I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him will I trust. Psalm 91 was the last psalm she read before dozing off. I couldn't sleep through most of the storm. I could hear tree branches being thrashed back to front, left to right, creating the sound of 1,000 black trash bags being whipped open with the wind. The old shutters on the large windows at the back of the house continuously vibrated, shattering most of the glass they were trying to protect. We had lost our electricity early in the storm, and once the thunder became powerful enough to shake the ground under the house, that's when Mom rushed us all into the bathroom. From the sound outside the door, it seemed as if the hurricane had taken everything we owned up in its winds. Our clothes and school books, our video games, and our beds. Mom prayed that the gas tank, which stood outside the kitchen door, would not explode, and her prayer was answered. By the next morning, almost everything the wind touched had been smashed, broken, or displaced. The poinsettia tree that stood in our side yard had collapsed on the neighbor's house. One of the traffic lights had landed in our bushes, along with a stop sign that had probably been blown from the next street down. Power lines had fallen, floodwaters had invaded many homes, and no one was allowed outside after sunset. School was postponed until further notice. Stores were closed for weeks. Families waited in line for hours to receive a melted bag of ice, bagged lunches, and candlesticks with matches. Mom missed 2 days of work waiting in the food stamp line for a measly $1,300, which was just enough to take care of the rent, buy some construction materials, and begin rebuilding our lives. She saved some of the money to buy the school supplies she thought we were going to need, but I knew that none of us would get the new pair of sneakers we were hoping to show off on that first day of school. There were thousands of people in line that day, miserable under the hot sun with nothing but scattered palm branches shading you if you were lucky enough to be standing underneath them. Police and men in military uniform acted as cattle herders, leading the masses to slaughter. Their unsympathetic faces, covered in sweat, watched all of us as if we were criminals looking for ways to escape. Their hands placed loosely on their guns, searching the crowds for misfits. Mommy, how many people are here? I asked, surveying the crowd. I knew how to count to 1,000, but at that moment the task seemed so daunting. Probably a couple of hundred, she said, taking a quick glance glance of the people in back of us and those in front. Only? I responded in disbelief. There has to be more than that. Look at all these people. The line goes on for miles. And it did. 3.9 miles to be exact, according to the report on Channel 7 News that was made on the radio that night. It could have been longer like it was the day before, but the officials got smart and started handing out numbered tickets so that you couldn't lose your place on the line and have to start all over again the next day. The welfare office was supposed to open at 8 that morning, so Mom and I got up at 6 because we had a good number and didn't know how fast the line was going to move, but they ended up opening at 10:45 a.m. because they didn't have enough stamps in the vault. By the time they were ready to start dispensing money, the crowd was restless and some people were becoming unruly. Do you want me to count them? I asked her. I can count up to 10,000 if I need to. I can even multiply, but I don't remember the whole table. No, Isla, she said, cutting me off from my next thought. I have a headache. Oh, I sighed, letting my gaze fall from hers to the ground. I took her left hand and began examining it. It was big and calloused and not at all soft like mine. Her nails were trimmed, but one had been broken, leaving a zigzag shape on the exposed nail bed. The end and the center of her palm was perfectly traced in the brown color of the back of her hand. Her lifeline was fluid and connected dozens of other lines throughout the surface of her skin. I opened and closed her hand twice and then 3 more times, hoping for something to appear. I flipped her hand over and touched it to my cheek. It was softer, but still dry. There was a small black beauty mark in the middle, which seemed so lonely and abandoned. I could not feel it as I smoothed my thumb over the surface of her hand. It was embedded in her skin. I looked at both of my hands, searching for that mark. I also had a small dot placed in the center. Look, Mommy, we're twins, I told her, pointing to my dot and then to hers. What am I looking at? She asked. That black dot, I answered, holding my hand up to her face and pointing to it. We both have the same dot in the middle of our left hand. She glanced more closely at mine and then drifted to hers. For a moment, I felt as if my mother belonged to me. I wanted to crawl into my mom's hands and be held there until this part of our lives was over. I wanted to disappear into that small black dot on her hand, unnoticed by the world. So this is the picture book version of that story called Miami Rain. Black bean-sized raindrops dance along the meadow gutters. Evergreen leaves of the queen palm tree shudder in the wind. Bright flashes of light strike through the dark clouds and the floorboards rumble underneath my feet. But what I hear is the timbales of an imaginary drum set, the thump and bump, the clatter and clang, the ring-a-ting-ting of mambo and bongo bells. It's the sound of Miami rain. Can you hear it? I ease over to my screened-in window, snapping my fingers to the count of uno, dos, y tres. Sizzling sounds of car tiles roll through splish-splash puddles, the cha-cha-cha of feet running against wet sidewalks. The crackling of branches breaking. This whirl and twirl of sound has me spinning around and around. This wets my skin, sending a chill down my back. I can't help but dance to this Miami Rain soundtrack. Can you feel it? The air is thick with humidity. I watch as the trumpet, trombone, conga drum, saxophone, claves, and cuatro piano dance all around me. These instruments are a part of the musical line that makes up this Miami Rain conga line. Can you see it? The earth softens as the rain waters the roots of fruits, vegetables, herb plants, and trees. The earthworms, sugar ants, mosquitoes, slugs, and palmetto bugs bathe in the potholes of asphalt roads. The rain swells the Miami River and the steam rises off the dry soil. Lightning strikes again, ringing the large dinner bell. This ain't no mumbo jumbo. This is the yummy recipe for Miami rain picadillo. Can you taste it? I smell dirt, soil, wet grass, and fallen leaves. The scent is so unique. Some call it summer rain, or scent, or mountain breeze. But none of those names mask the earthly odor known as petrichor. Each drop of rain is like a fast-moving wave through the Florida Bay. My nose tunes into this wild scent parade I call the Miami Rain Everglades. Can you smell it? It's a carnival of senses. Hearing the thunder, feeling the sound, seeing the mist from the rain spin around, tasting rain stew and smelling its tunes like a fragrant orange blossom perfume. No matter the strength of the thump and bumps or the power of the clatter and clangs or the noise of the ring-a-ting-ting corazon, together let's sing la 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 as we dance through the streets of this Miami Rain Coyote Festival. Thank you.
Welcome back.
I'm gonna let you all pick. Should I read new prose or should we just close it down with a picture? Okay, so this is it's interesting because Chris talked about writing from what you know. So this is a piece that's coming out in an anthology where I was asked to write about myself. So it's still technically, I'm the main character, but now I'm gonna make it into a middle grade novel. So it's gonna be published like this, I guess in May. But I'm currently transforming it into a middle grade novel where the character is no longer me, but this is where it starts. So it's called There's More to Playing Ball Than Just Playing Ball. Mr. Presswood was at the gate waving to me. It felt like I was swimming through some kind of airproof bubble as I started to work him. I'd just taken the first flight of my life and my ears were no longer working. All the voices around me had muffled into a low hum, like when you hold a seashell up to your ear to try and hear the ocean. I had a small duffel bag slung over my shoulder, packed with a toothbrush, a couple t-shirts, a tattered pair of high tops. A crisp $20 bill, a last-minute gift from my grandmother, was tucked inside my notebook. No remedy for plugged-up ears. Ah, there he is, Mr. Presswood said, taking my duffel. I squinted, trying to make meaning out of his muted sounds. Excuse me, sir? He patted me on the back. I said, here you are. You made it. I didn't want him to repeat himself again, so I nodded. Truth be told, I dotted my way through much of my childhood. Whenever I found myself in an uncomfortable situation, or if someone asked me a question I didn't understand or didn't want to understand, I'd simply nod my head, like it was all good. We're on the same page. Let's just move on and forget this whole thing ever happened. I'd learned it from the best, my old man. You ready? Mr. Presswood asked, starting toward the exit. This time I did a little lip reading to supplement his muffled sounds. Ready, sir. He stopped and turned to me. Look, man, there's no need to call me sir. We invited you up here for the weekend. You're our guest, understand? It sounded like his words were coming from some other terminal in some other city. I nodded, and then we were on the escalator going up, up, up. I knew the Presswoods because my mom used to babysit their daughters. My mom babysat a whole mess of kids back then. Each morning I was awakened by the doorbell as parents ushered their toddlers into our small house or handed over crying babies before backpedaling toward their cars, waving and blowing kisses, then driving off to their important jobs. Me and my sisters ate breakfast cereal at the table surrounded by a handful of random kids staring at us, another handful crawling around near our feet. After school, I had to tiptoe into my own room to keep from waking up whichever kid was napping there. Sometimes one of these kids would pee my bed too, but don't worry. My mom had covered every mattress plastic sheets. Mr. Presswood was a well-known high school basketball coach. On Fridays, he was the one who did the pickup. And once he found out I was obsessed with the game, like he was obsessed with the game, he started dropping little nuggets of hoop wisdom as he corralled his kids. Always challenge yourself, Matt. If you're not getting beat, you're not getting better. Quiet your mind when you take the court. The best players don't reason their way through the game, they feel their way through it. Ever take a psych class, Matt? You need to understand human motivation. There's more to playing the game of basketball than just playing basketball. After he accepted the head coaching position at a powerhouse high school in Northern California, he'd occasionally write me letters. They were short, some bit of hoop advice or an update about his new team, a line about my mom and how much they missed having reliable childcare. But near the end of summer, he sent a different kind of letter. It was an invitation. They wanted to know if I'd like to visit their family one weekend. They'd pay for my flight and feed me and set me up in their spare bedroom. Maybe you can even work out with my guys, Mr. Presswood scribbled beneath his signature. When I showed the letter to my dad, he scoffed. Why would you want to do that? You've got food in a bedroom here. But my mom was more open to this kind of thing. To her, it was an opportunity. Same thing for my abuela. And I think my sister just wanted me out of the house. Eventually, the five of us wore my old man down, and one night, as I was washing dishes, he walked past me on his way to the fridge and muttered, "Just do what you gotta do, all right?" I spun around. "So it's okay? I can go?" He shrugged and took his beer into the living room and sat back in front of the TV. A week later, my mom was dropping me off at the airport. Growing up, we never went anywhere. We stayed tucked inside our working class community and put our heads down and didn't ask the world for anything special. I guess that's why I felt so strange shuffling down the jet bridge with my duffel bag, clutching my boarding pass. I felt guilty for dreaming beyond my humble little life. I felt disloyal. I felt like I was turning my back on who I was supposed to be. When we pulled into Mr. Presswood's long driveway, we found Miss Presswood sitting on the front porch with their daughters. She gave me a hug and welcomed me to their home. And then the girls led me on a grand tour, pointing out every closet, every potted plant and toy bin and family photo. I was fairly certain the younger one, Sonia, had peed my bed on at least one occasion. But I was so humbled by the Presswood's generosity, I was ready to forgive. Halfway through dinner, after I nodded and shrugged my way through the conversation, Miss Presswood covered my hand with her own hand and said in a loud, slow voice, "You can't hear a word we're saying, can you, Matt?" I shook my head. "Not really, ma'am." Miss Presswood turned to her husband and practically shouted, "His ears are plugged up from the flight. Doesn't he know how to pop them?" Sonia asked. "He could just chew gum," her sister added. "These girls are old pros," Mr. Presswood said with a wink. "I've been on 13 flights," Sonia announced, including one to Frankfurt, Germany that lasted 12 and a half hours. And now Mr. and Mrs. Presswood and their daughters were laughing. I grinned and forked in a bite of lasagna. As I chewed, I glanced around their giant house at the framed art hanging on every wall and the fancy chandelier and polished hardwood floors. And I was so swept up by it all, I began laughing too, imagining that I had always lived here with this blonde, blue-eyed family. And each night after dinner, we had apple pie, which Miss Presswood was now dishing out with perfect little scoops of ice cream, as classical music played quietly on the speakers mounted above our heads, making it all seem like a scene from a movie. When Miss Presswood came back from putting away the ice cream, she set a small white pill in front of me and said in her loud, slow voice, "This is an antihistamine, Matt. It will help drain the fluid." I washed it down with water, and she demonstrated how I could pop my ears by pinching my nose with my thumb and forefinger and closing my mouth and blowing hard. I followed her instructions and made a big show of sucking in a deep breath, but I only pretended to blow. The whole thing seemed a little weird to me. What if my eardrums exploded? What if the Presswoods had to rush me to the hospital and I was unable to play ball with Mr. Presswood's team? So, one of the girls said, once I'd let go of my nose, did it work? I looked at all of their expectant faces. I nodded. They cheered and Sonia gave me a high five and Miss Presswood said, "You don't have to suffer in silence, Matt. You can ask us for help." "It's going to be tough out there," Mr. Presswood warned the following morning on our way to the high school. "These guys are older than you, and they're coming off a league championship." I was only half listening though. I was more focused on the fact that my hearing had improved. "Things get too intense," he went on. "You can always take a break, understand?" "Yes, sir." "No harm in watching from the bleachers." We pulled into the mostly empty parking lot, and I spotted a group of high schoolers standing around the closed green doors, waiting to be let in. There were some pretty big dudes there, all white, wearing blue and silver sweatshirts or hoop shorts, some passing a basketball back and forth, others stretching or dribbling, or lobbing a ball off the concrete wall and catching it. Mr. Presswood fumbled with his keys as we approached the gym. He introduced me, telling his team that I was a family friend visiting from San Diego, and I was only going into the 9th grade. The guys all told me their names and gave me good-natured fist bumps and slaps on the back, and then Mr. Presswood headed off toward the parking lot, and the rest of us filed into the dark gym. Someone flipped on the lights. There were 3 full courts. All the nets were intact, all the walls covered with championship banners. As the guys took the court, some shooting flat-footed warm-up shots, others tying their shoes or stretching, butterflies took flight inside my stomach. This had always been my favorite feeling in the world, excitement mixed with fear, like when your roller coaster cart clink, clink, clinks up to the top of the highest peak and you know it's about to go down. A guy named Henderson split up the teams and barked out who was guarding who, and before I knew it, we were sprinting up and down the court, and I was sucking wind. First time I touched the ball, I fumbled it out of bounds. A minute later, I shot a short jumper from the left elbow that barely grazed iron. Neither team had even scored a point yet, and I could already read it on their faces. These guys thought I was a scrub. They thought I was some weak link, hoop imposter they'd have to carry all morning as a favor to Mr. Presswood. But soon I got my wind back, and my nerves quieted. After I buried a second deep 3 in a row, the guy on the sideline said, "Okay, new dude, I see you." A few plays later, I picked off a lazy cross-court pass, drove down the lane, and lobbed a high-arcing floater over Bates' outstretched hands that nestled in the net, putting us up 3. It was the floater that changed things. That's when these bigger, stronger, league champion upperclassmen saw me for who I really was, when they stepped aside and allowed me into the guts of their game. Truth be told, when it came to the sport of basketball, this is what I lived for. Not the wins or losses, not the makes or misses, not the lifelong friendships or any of that rah-rah coach speak. No, I was consumed with the way in an instant I could so radically change the way other people perceived me. One minute, I was a mop-headed half Mexican in hand-me-down sneakers. The next minute, I was the guy they looked for on game point. Skip ahead. The games had just died down when Mr. Presswood came back. He held open one of the green doors, grinning as his guys all slapped hands with me on our way out of the gym, saying things like, "That crossover's nasty though, and you saw how he put it on slowly, right? And next time he's with me, coach." It was mostly quiet as we drove back. When Mr. Presswood pulled into his driveway and shut off the car, he didn't get out right away. He stared through the windshield at his garage door, nodding to himself. "I remember when your mom first told me you played," he said. "I had one of my assistants watch you in summer. He said you could really shoot it." He turned to face me. "What I saw there today, Matt, you have a chance to really do something special with this game. And I keep thinking, my God, if only this kid had real coaching." I shifted in my seat. "You were watching us?" He smiled, pulling his keys from the ignition. "We have a coaching booth near the top of the bleachers. I always grab a coffee from across the street, then climb up into the booth to watch. The guys all know Why do you think there's never any argument? Something about this conversation made me feel like I was going to cry. I think it was his use of the word special. I'd spent all my life trying to get close to a word like that. Or it could have been something more cynical, like deep down, I knew he was wrong about me, and I couldn't bear the thought of his disappointment when he realized it. That night during dinner, Miss Presswood clinked her fork against her water glass and said, "Girls, there's something we'd like to discuss." Mr. Presswood set down his milk glass and looked at me before turning to his two daughters. "Your mom and I have been batting around an idea. We think Matt would really benefit from some additional structure. I'm not just talking about athletic structure. We're only in the exploratory phase right now," Miss Presswood said, "but we want to be transparent right from the beginning. How would you two feel if we invited Matt to come and live with us?" The girls looked at me, excitedly nodding their heads. "This would only be during the school year, of course," Mr. Presswood added, "if Matt and his parents are even interested." I sat there frozen and shocked. "He could live in my room," Sonia blurted out. Her sister rolled her eyes. "He doesn't want to share a room with a 6-year-old, Sonia." Turning to her parents, she said, "Couldn't we buy him a real bed and put it in the library room? We could take down some of our art so he could hang pictures of his family or whatever." "That's very thoughtful, Taylor," Miss Presswood said. "Could he walk us to school?" Sonia wanted to know. My whole body began to tingle as I sat there listening to their conversation. It didn't even seem real. Mr. and Mrs. Presswood smiled, and Mr. Presswood turned to me. "Matt, this is something you'd have to explore with your parents, obviously. But let me just say this. I know how to take a kid with God-given talent and turn him into a real basketball player. By the time you were a senior, trust me, college coaches would be beating down your door." "We're talking about your future," Miss Presswood said. "Do you understand the value of a free education?" Early the next morning, Mr. Presswood drove me back to the high school gym. He didn't park this time. He handed me a key to the gym and reached over to open his door, saying, "If I pick you up at 3, that means you'll be all alone in there for almost 8 hours. You sure you're okay with that?" I slid out of the car. "Definitely, sir." He smiled and gave me a little salute before slowly pulling away. I flipped on the lights as soon as I got inside the gym. I pulled out the rack of leather basketballs and tied my shoes and took out my notebook. I spent the first hour shooting threes from various spots around the arc and jotting down how many I'd made out of each 100. Then I did a series of ball handling drills. Then I shot free throws. Then I played imaginary games of one-on-one to the point that I was dripping sweat. If someone peeked their head inside the gym, they'd probably think I was the most dedicated basketball player around. But being alone in a gym was actually really hard for me. It always had been. And as I plopped down on the court to rest, I realized something. Maybe it wasn't the game itself I was so obsessed with, but all the stuff that came with it. When I played ball, I felt a sense of control, and I had a reason to be around other people. And when I played well, it almost felt like my life had meaning. When Mr. Presswood had asked me how much time I wanted in the gym, I told him as much as possible. But I'd only said that because I knew it would impress him, because I knew it would reinforce the version of me he'd been building inside his head. In reality, I'd barely been in the gym 2 hours and I was bored out of my mind. Did all this make me a fraud? I lay on my back and stared up into the rafters, thinking about the Presswood's offer, thinking about what it would be like to live in a big house on a tree-lined street, so far away from everything and everyone I knew, thinking about what it'd be like to get great coaching and maybe even play on a championship team. Eventually, I found myself flipping through my notebook, reading through all my stats and trying to remember which courts I'd been at when I'd shot my best. But there weren't just shooting stats in my notebook. There were some poems mixed in there too, random things I'd written down when I'd been especially lonely, waiting for the bus outside Muni Gym in Balboa Park, cutting through the zoo parking lot, sitting near the edge of the cliff across from Glen Park, looking at the ocean. I couldn't hear a thing when I stepped off the plane in San Diego. My ears were plugged up so bad, I felt like I was underwater. No one was waving for me when I came down the jet bridge this time, so I took the escalator down to baggage claim. When I didn't see anyone there either, I exited the airport and stood by the curb looking all around. I watched a military family reunite and a group of businessmen hurry after the rental car show. I watched a police officer motion for cars to move along. After a few minutes, I saw something familiar, our old beat up Volkswagen Bug. And to my surprise, it was my old man in the driver's seat. I hustled over to where he'd stopped and tossed in my duffel into the back seat and climbed into the passenger seat and closed my door. As we pulled away from the curb, he said something I couldn't make out. What? I asked. And on a whim, I pinched my nose with my thumb and forefinger and blew. To my astonishment, my ears popped, and suddenly I could hear it. I said, "It's good to have you back," he told me. "Thanks," I said. And then I just sat there, staring through the windshield as we merged onto the highway. As I studied the cars all around us, speeding up or slowing down, changing lanes, I realized I was never going to do high school away from home, even if it meant my life would be a little bit smaller here, or more ordinary, even if it meant college coaches might never beat down my door. This wasn't just where I belonged, I decided. It's where I wanted to be, at least for now. My dad didn't say another word the rest of the way home, but I felt like I could hear everything. Thank you.
Another round of applause for our three. Thank you so much for sharing your creative voice with us. And now we have the unique opportunity of mining the expertise of these three fabulous authors and scholars. And I thought we might start with a little bit of an origin story, perhaps how each of you kind of made your journey into this genre of researching and writing in children's middle grade and or young adults. And we do have a little mic over there too.
Since I have the mic, I think it's on. Yeah, since I have the mic, I'll start first. My journey started off, I feel like a lot of writers. I was that girl who loved to write in a journal, had my first diary around the age of 7. I hated reading. I'm not one of those writers who are like, oh, let's go to the library and get books. I thought reading took up too much of my time to be in my own world. So I spent a lot of time just kind of writing what I thought was good writing at the time. But it wasn't until after I got my MFA, again, I put my novels to the side. And then when I went back to grad school, I found out that my mother was terminal. And I was like, I told her I was going to be a writer. I've got like 6 months to be a writer. And that actually pushed my children's book forward. Like a month before she passed away, I signed the contract that this book was going to be published. And I was like, you won't be able to see the Mom, we did it. I'm going to be a writer. And then of course she passed and I continued into graduate school, but that was really the impetus for me because I feel like all the time the response would say, oh, one day I'll write this, one day I'll write this. But I had 6 months and I knew I was like, I want to make sure that she knew that I would live out the dream that I said. And so that was my moment.
Yeah, I like they did talk about moments. Cool. I think one moment I had was at CSU in the MFA, where I had a professor named Glover Davis. Raise your hand if you know who that is. Okay. This guy was awesome. He was because I was a college athlete and I played football in high school and I was in theater and I always loved arts. He was in all the things. And I always thought I was a writer. I'm a writer. I'm going to be something. And I went to Glover Davis's English, whatever poetry is, I can't remember, 2 something. Anyway, he was a big football coach of a man. And I wrote this poem and he said, you talk like this. He said, Chris, where are you? I was like, oh, right here. He said, this poem is garbage. He's like one of those people that pull it off, he says that. And I wrote really what was, first of all, I was like, you cannot see that as work. That is not right. But he was right. It was very cliche. I think it was a love poem. The word pedestal was in the poem. It was like all the bad things you can imagine. He said, but what he basically told me was, what do you care about? I said, what do you care about? And I was on the rowing team, and I said, well, I guess I care about rowing because it's all I do all the time. He said, write about that. And so I went home and I wrote a new poem about waking up like a zombie, going to the boathouse at 4:30 a.m. and like floating through that boathouse and sitting on the water with like glass and the way what it felt like to float there with your muscles so cold and then suddenly warming up. And I wrote that poem called Waking the Boats. And he was like, this is the poem. And there was, just that moment of like, oh, this is what writing is. And that made me really feel more like not only that I could do it, but like what I cared about mattered. So that was a big moment that started me often getting a little more serious about writing.
Yeah, so for me, it was like, when I was in high school, I was a basketball player. I went to college, for basketball, but what nobody knew about is that all through high school, I was writing spoken word style poetry. And I never shared it with anyone. I always called it, all right, spoken word poetry that I speak to no one. And I didn't think you were supposed to write poetry as a boy, as a guy, and especially in a machismo kind of family. So I was doing that. And then I got a basketball scholarship. I became the first in my family to go to college. And that's where I woke up. Like I woke up as a human being in undergrad. And I started owning that I wrote poems. I took English classes, I took creative writing courses. And then I had an incredible thing happen to me. One of my professors was a big basketball fan, and he would pull me into his office and ask me about my teammates that were like the stars on the team, so I'd give them gossip, and I thought it would help my grade. But what it ended up doing is he got to know me, and at the end of my college career, 4 professors who I'd had for creative writing had gathered together all my creative work and applied me to grad school without my knowledge. And they applied me to 5 schools, and I got into 2, and they were Fresno State and San Diego State. And they told me what an MFA was. I'd never heard of it. And they said, you can study writing in graduate school. And I was like, I would love to try that. So I chose to go here to be closer to where my parents lived at the time. And then really it was here that I was introduced to writing for young people. And here's the way it happened. I was looking for a literature class. I think you still have to take a literature class in the MFA program, right, at seminar. And I was like, I don't want to do that much reading. Books for kids. I'll do that one. And the professor was named Alita Allison. And she's passed away, but she was a legend. I didn't know that at the time. And I sat in her class and I was like, oh my God, these stories are incredible. And this is the kind of thing I want to write. So I didn't know that I was going to write for young people at that time, but I did get introduced to the power of that kind of writing. And yeah, and then it goes from there.
Now that we know the origins, where do we want to take it from here? I would love to get some questions from our real in-person audience. Up here. You can raise your actual hand, and you don't have to click the little hand. Yes, Jake.
Well, this is a question for Chris. Chris, I was an undergrad, I think about the same time as you. I know Steve Link, says hello, by the way. I went to one of your workshops, and I would like you to walk this through, if you don't mind, what your thought process was. But you handed out an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and it was a picture of a person, and you wanted them to put some phrases there about their identity or just their worldview. And I still have mine on my bookshelf. It was so meaningful for me. What led you to do that, and tell us about that?
Wow, that's a really good question. Thank you. And tell Steve I said hi. Steve is my undergraduate roommate. That's fantastic. So we did a workshop here. My wife and I actually did it. And one of the reasons I like writing for young people is because so much identity is formed. And I know that that's part of it for me was it still resonates with me. Like things I read at that time, things I heard about at that time, names called, that people called me at that time, still are voices in my head. And that's something that I think we deal with as adults growing up. I remember like I wrote an article for this really cool magazine called Novel Mind, which talks about neurodiverse issues and this kind of thing. And it was all about, like, even in college when I was like 7% body fat, feeling like I was overweight. I was like an athlete, just the mindset of that kind of thing. So it's important, I think. One of the reasons I like writing was a chance to, like, this sounds grandiose, but like hope and redemption and this kind of thing. But I do think it's important, and especially having my own kids. That particular thing we did was, I was talking about this book, All of Me, and how Ari is looking to form his identity. And just this little assignment I do, and I do it actually with school kids of all grades, where it's just an outline of a body, and you sort of identify parts of that body with terms, what comes to mind. It takes a while to do that. It's not something I do fast because it goes kind of deep, but it's a way of identifying. And that came from the process of writing this book. Writing any book, any work of any length requires things like research, discussion, discovery. You all know this. This book in particular came with a lot of exploration. So out of it came lots of great like exercises, and that was one of them I shared with you. It was a chance to reflect.
What else do you want to know? Yes, over here.
What would you say that for all of you, I want all of you to answer this. What would you say the three, if you can't agree with fine, but the three main things is what is necessary for writing like to young people, and the three things you should avoid, because we're not like young in the same way as the audience, right? So we have to kind of like take ourselves out of it in some way. So how would you like balance that with also like your style and like who you are to communicate with kids?
Three things we need to keep in mind when writing for young people, and three things to avoid.
Yeah.
Good question.
I feel like this is a good way to talk about worldview, just to kind of truncate that a little bit so our answers are quicker. I feel like when I write, I think there's a difference between, I don't believe in happy endings, but I believe in hopeful endings. And if you're writing for young people, I feel like there needs to be a sense of hope. But happy endings are boring and lame. So I try to get a hopeful ending. And then I just think bringing your world view to the page. Like I always tell people, you should never enter a story with a message. Like that's bad writing. That's like, you might as well just write an essay, right? But you should have a point of view. And I think we've all kind of explored what our point of view is. And kids, more than even adults, can smell a rat. So if you're not telling the truth in your work, they know it.
I would say for me, going the research route, I feel like a lot of the times we often talk about being writers, but we forget that there's a whole field of study in terms of children's literature. So definitely think about what it means to wanting to write for young children, but also what does it mean to study text for young children? So I would advise taking a children's literary studies class and really seeing it from a different lens, not just about what we're writing, but why we're writing it, who's writing about it, what kind of gatekeeping is happening, what kind of culturally unsensitive things that are happening in the field, understanding the field as a whole, even before thinking about writing for the genre.
That's really good point. I love that. I feel like it's a learning process all the time, writing for young people. What can I add? I'm not sure. I don't know. I think the only thing I would say is reading a lot of it. There are a lot of great books. I'm constantly reading, and I don't just mean like reading a whole book through on to the next one. I just mean a pile of books on your desk that you're reading all the time to remember. For sometimes what established authors have already done is a really great guide, like a guidepost to read. And then all of that, if these are books that have sort of done well and made a mark in whatever way is meaningful to you and to others, they'll teach you the things that are so important, like cultural sensitivity, not having a message, but telling a story. And then the biggest one too is kids really appreciate craft. They really, I think it's important to remember that. When I read kid reviews or talk to especially younger kids, like 5th, 6th grade, when they talk about the stories, they really get into it. Like the way I love the way the blanket had this texture, it always amazes me. So craft is another big one.
Interesting how essentially everything y'all mentioned are kind of pillars of just any good writing and scholarship as well. So not just writing for younger people, but writing in general. It's fair it sounds like. Another question. Yes, sir, over there.
This is a question for all of you as well, but how do you write on the days when you don't want to write or too tired to write?
Write on the days you don't want to write or too tired to write.
Don't do that.
You heard it here, ladies and gentlemen.
I would start off by saying, write on the days you want to write. No one's forcing you to write on days you don't want to write. Make a schedule for those days that you find yourself really wanting to be with your craft. Like it's not a relation. Hopefully it's not a relationship where your writing is forcing you to be with it. Hopefully you want to be with your writing. And on those days when you're not necessarily wanting to be with your writing, I think your writing is okay with that, right? Like don't force yourself to be in it in a moment if you don't feel motivated. But I would hope then on those days, then you would come back to days when you are motivated to write, and then can come back it with love and care and a different lens than you had the day before.
I think we all just have different approaches, right? Because me, I just like make myself go there every day, and I just try to like live up to working class family members. I just work with words instead of cement, So for me, it's very important to just show up every day. But I think you would probably agree with this, Lashon, that even when you're not sitting at your desk, you can still be doing the work, like you taking a walk, you're thinking through a story, all of that counts. Like the rumination phase of a book is actually probably more than half.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that doing the work is the key. Matt has told me this 1,000 times, but just showing up and doing the work in whatever way, whether it is taking a walk or maybe not watching something. Sometimes I think that's useful, but like a clip that inspires you, whatever it takes. I tell my students, my creative writing students all the time, like, I know that we all have a bay window that's over a river and that you drink your morning coffee there and you get inspired. And they don't get my sarcasm either right away. But eventually they realize that like, no, that's not true for any of us. The reality is we need to show up, do what we can, and put the time in somehow. But I like what you're saying. It shouldn't be compulsory. It should be something that you're dedicated to, and that looks different all the time for everyone.
Yes.
So I really admire all three of you for being so vulnerable in your work, and it's so inspiring for me because of course, as we all probably do, aim to be the most vulnerable as we can in our work. How do you combat that natural instinct to not be vulnerable? Because it's such a human instinct, but it's so essential for writers to be vulnerable.
Vulnerability in writing, the balance.
Honestly, though, I believe that the only writing worth doing is going all the way, and going to the place that is the most vulnerable, because that's where the good stuff is. And I feel like it takes a long time to get there, because you're even stopping yourself a lot of times while you're writing. And so, yeah, like, how do you find a way? It's interesting. It's like, should I drop some Brene Brown on these people? No, but like, there's something about meeting somebody, and if they share something truthful about themselves, you want to be closer to them. It's the same thing when we read. If you read something that's like deeply vulnerable about a character, you're more likely to want to come closer to that character, to take care of that character, to follow them. So I think it's very similar.
Yeah, I mean, I just think about that term, like that there's strength and vulnerability. And I always hear that, like, what does it even mean? It's like, how does that, but I think what Matt's saying is really true, that things worth saying might require you to be vulnerable. And that's how you can be more real in the world. So I try to remember that, even there are times when I want to shut down and not communicate. But I know the pain of shutting down. I know the challenge of what it's like when family and friends don't share, don't connect, and also overshare. And so I think as writers, you practice the art of it too. What does it mean to be vulnerable when you're writing, but not just for the sake of it? How do you frame it so it can relate?
The last thing I'll say with that is that there's an expectation that you're going to be vulnerable, but also that you're writing about situations in which other people are involved. And so there are moments in which you have to decide, am I going to sever this relationship in real life in order to get this like full vulnerability out? Or is there a place when I can go in my creative self and say, tap into that moment, but maybe not write about it in exactly the way you experienced it, right? When you can still hold on to that vulnerability, but not make that scene exactly how it played out in real life.
Other questions for these fabulous? Go ahead.
So if we've done our own writing in the past and we're really confident on a short story or a poem that we've written, who should we seek out to kind of give us feedback? Should we share it with everyone we know, or should we have a select few? Because I want to just share my work all the time, but I know that that's not really beneficial at times, just because it's, I don't know, it's better to have more of a professional outlook, I like to say, but I'm not sure. Who would you guys go to go over your work besides your publisher?
From whom do we get decent feedback besides the folks in this room? Well,
What a nuanced question. This is. No. I think it's a great question. And I think everyone's gonna have a little bit of a different answer, but also some commonalities. I've been part of writing group since the MFA. Allie's here, like I've been in the same group for poetry. I have other people that I run things by. Community is crucial in writing. And I think we need to be careful of who is in that community, who we trust with our words. Not in a scary way, but I think cultivating a community of people that you trust, that believe in you and your work, that will be honest with you, can look so different to everyone. It is very easy to put your work out there. You can have a blog still a thing. You can have a blog. I don't know what they're called. Whatever. You can live tweet your story. Whatever. There we go. But you get the point. Like you can get your work out there. That's not the issue. The issue is making it the best it can be and what are your goals with that. So I think community is a word that really popped up for me when you were talking.
When I was writing Mr. Oprah, I actually sent it to my best friend who's a fourth grade teacher. And that wasn't something I had thought about necessarily because she was a teacher. It was mostly because she's my best friend and I needed validation. But it was actually as a result of her advice, knowing that this could be taught in a fourth grade classroom, that it made the story make more sense to me as someone who necessarily wasn't thinking about what does it actually write? What does it mean to write for something that could be taught in a classroom? And so her insight was really helpful for me. So I think it's also can be something as simple as sending it to your best friend, but also thinking strategically, where might you see this piece going? Who do you have access to who's in that space? And then go to them with that kind of insight. I know one of the things that my publicist said to me was like, oh, always test your work out in the classroom even before it becomes a picture book. Not all of us have access to a classroom, but perhaps you do have access to teachers or other young people. Don't always go to adults. Try it with young children and see if they get a laugh or if they're interested, right? There's other ways of thinking about this genre, not towards adults, but actually bringing children together and reading your work.
The only thing I'd add is that, if you're in a workshop, I always say like 20% of the feedback you hear will be helpful. That means like you have to also know what not to listen to. You have to, but I think the goal of being in an MFA program or in an undergrad workshop is that you're going to have maybe 2 or 3 friendships that go beyond the class. And ultimately those friendships are actually more valuable than the class because you share work together. When I moved to New York, this is like 17 years ago, I had a writing group that emerged with 4 adult authors. and they were so nasty, like these critique partners, but I loved their feedback, even though some of it just didn't apply to what I was doing. And they helped me write every book that I wrote, you know. So I like what you said about community. That's so important to figure out who your readers are, and then they can kind of grow with you.
Just thinking of this, how like some of your workshops, the skills you're learning in workshops are really important. I know even now, like I have a community of critique partners, but also now, like I would consider like my literary agent community, like she'll read my work and say, oh, you know, this needs to be done here. But I'm using what I learned in the workshop to take in the good, understand what comments are most helpful. Even my Macmillan editor, like you know, she has her comments. But the skills of workshopping and that you're experiencing now are super useful and will last.
Advice. I feel like there's this dusty trope of the writer who sits alone, you know, writes their work, shuns the sun, and doesn't want to talk to anybody. But community is such an important aspect. And you're right, you know, finding those people it's just a couple, right, that you really trust. All right, so I want to conclude this evening with some practical questions, because I know that, you know, many of us are thinking about, well, okay, we've got some things, we've got a community, but how do we get it out into the world? What does that kind of look like, right? And I actually received an email from a former student who was in the Living Writers class who has a children's book, and she was asking about finding an illustrator. So I wonder if maybe you or all of you could speak about how you work to find illustrators for your work, what that looks like.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think you go to the Living Writers reading series, because I believe we have a couple of illustrators in the crowd right now. Is this true? Can you raise your hand if you're an illustrator? You know, it's ultimately you don't normally get to choose your illustrator. You go through a publisher and they pick who it is. So I think the most important thing to do is concentrate on the task at hand. So come up with a great manuscript, maybe workshop with friends or community members, or join something like SCBWI. I know I said that fast, but SCBWI, it's Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and it's this incredible national community. I know, Sean, you interviewed the person who founded it for a podcast, but you will meet people in the field. There are illustrators there, there are writers there. There are also agents that go speak there. There are writers that go speak there. So it's just finding the resources, like communities like that. And then ultimately, the first thing you have to do is connect with an agent. Unfortunately, that's the most important relationship you will have for your entire career.
I unfortunately have never met my illustrator. And so that there are opportunities in which you can work on a book together and never meet or never have a conversation because your editor is the middle person. It doesn't mean that that's not the right way, but I do think that there are ways in which working with someone directly to build something works well. And also, what does it mean when you don't get to work directly with that person? I have an illustrator friend, and we have this argument all the time where she's like, it's my art. You know, you give me your art, and therefore I can make my art. And it's also something that I agree with. Yes, to respect the fact that my text holds enough weight for her that she can create from there. But I want control. I want to make sure that all of the illustrations look how I imagined it when I wrote it. Unfortunately, that is often not the case.
I've got nothing but illustrations. Just,
So book covers.
but I
yeah.
can talk. Okay. So I guess it's similar in process that I've never met Untitled Chapter, who did Magical Imperfect, or Chris Chabon, who did All of Me. But I am a big fan of their work, and I didn't have really any say in how the covers look. Did I have some say? Yes. We were managed to change the font of this cover originally because I didn't necessarily like it. But I love the artwork. I was so moved by all of it. So it just depends. Not much of an illustrator sort of discussion, but I think it's to the point that sometimes you don't have much say as a writer what happens with the illustrator. But I love the energy of the relationship. Like I've talked to both Andre and Chris about how much I love their work and collaborated with them on different ideas about how to honor them, because I really was so impressed by how much they capture the spirit of what the books were about.
And then the big question, but we're going to try to, I think Matt used the word truncate. We're going to try to truncate the responses. So again, you have the work, it's ready to go out. What are maybe a couple practical steps that we can take if we want to get our book into the hands of an agent, a publisher? What does that look like? Any advice for us?
I do not have an agent. I published my first book without an agent. That is rare. I was working at a children's museum for 4 years, and we had so many children's book authors come through, particularly through this particular published company, that I knew their catalog so well. So when I sent them this text, I said, this is the book missing from your catalog. So they agreed, right? So I think that there are ways in which you can just be in other spaces and see a gap and want to fill that gap. And then there's always the traditional way, of course, of getting an agent and having that agent do that work for you. And what does it mean for you to be your own agent, right? I have to learn how to read a children's book contract. Again, not thinking I was going to be a children's book author and going through that whole process myself. I'm grateful that I did that because now I have a whole slew of understanding of how the process actually works. But again, it really depends on what your desire is. I write children's books, but I mostly study children's books. So I didn't necessarily need an agent to work me through this whole process for the rest of my career. However, it is something that I do think about, like what does it mean to move into the industry in that particular way? But again, it's not a cookie cutter kind of situation, but you can get published without an agent. I hear it is harder, but I think that there are smart ways to think about what does it mean to try to fill in a gap with a particular publisher.
And I also just want to, it's so cool to be on this panel with someone who actually studies the craft, because that's just, it means so much as a creator, right? To all of us, to have people take it seriously. I think the one thing about children's literature that pisses me off is that, a lot of people, including some people in this room, probably think of kids' books and they go, when are you going to write a real book? Or, this isn't as important. But obviously we take it very seriously. This is our life. This is everything we believe in. We're putting it into these books. So the one thing I would just share about the journey is that when I was in this program, nobody talked about it. And I knew nothing when I left the program. I heard that it was hard to publish a book. I heard you have to get an agent first. I heard that was almost impossible. And so I left and I revised the book many, many times. So that's the most important thing, is to have a great product, a very solid book. And then, for me, it's about getting an agent simply because an agent doesn't just sell your book, they protect you from what happens if your book does well. So, like if your book does really well, they've got something locked into place that gives you even more of a percentage, right? So they leverage success. And that's the value of an agent for me, and they don't just look at this book, they're trying to build a career as opposed to selling this one book. So that's the value. I went to LA, I had a book right out of the program. I went to Barnes and Noble, I looked at the agent book, to find an agent. I found 5 that I wanted to send to. I got in line to pay for the book, realized that it cost $32 and I only had like 19. So I went into a dark corner and ripped out all the pages of the agents and put them in my back pocket, and one of those became my agent. So I feel like you gotta do what you gotta do. I'm advocating crime, if we need to do that. But yeah, I think the agent, once you get the agent, your job now is to create books. And your agent does all the other stuff. That's the value of an agent. My first agent said, after he signed me to take on my work, he said, don't cross your fingers. I was like, what? And he said, don't cross your fingers. It makes it hard to type. So in other words, your job is to type, work on another book. So.
Internet.
Well, that's
Okay.
This is back in the day.
Weirdly outdated. I mean, I don't want to say the same process over, but I think for me, this book, Landry Tree was published on more literary press. In other words, kind of a more standard process of publishing in journals and magazines, and then having a collection of work and then putting it into a smaller press. But then when I kind of decided, like, I kind of want to try for a bigger audience, why not? And more traditional publishing. And part of what happened was I started having my own kids, and that really was a big part of the process of wanting to write for young people. So I looked into the process, and I actually talked to Matt. Matt, I've been friends for a long time, and Renee Swindle, actually, who's in our program, and just started asking, like, what was the road? Because in the program, you're right, no one really talked about this process back then. But I learned all about what it meant to have an agent, and same kind of thing. I found a few agents that I thought might be interested in my work. I kind of talked to Matt and really like, do you know these agents? What do you think about this? But just did my homework basically. And then exactly what Matt said too, just I concentrated over a few years of writing the best book I could write from the heart, the absolute best one. And I wanted it to have fire. I wanted it to have everything it could have to give it its best shot. So that when I went out there and queried, I think I did 15 agents. I knew I was sending my best work out there. So it's not a fast thing. It's not a fast process. It's a really put the work in process. And when I got back, some requests from these agents to see more work, it was like, okay, like it's paying off. Now, I got really lucky and I found an agent and connected with who I really felt does all the things that Matt's talking about. It's not an easy process at all, but I think that the starting point is if you want to go that route, is to create the best work you can and do your homework. And by the way, I'm happy to talk about this process with anyone, different points. I think there's a lot of nuances to this, and I would love to help anyone in the program that I can.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, for your gracious insight and responses. And thanks to all of you for being here. I did want to mention that again, I've been waiting 2 years to say this. There are books for sale in the back. You want some reading to do over spring break. It's coming up. They make great gifts too. And yes, if you want to take a little bit of time, if you have some questions we didn't get a chance to get to, you're welcome to ask them. But let's do more of this, right? Yeah. All right. Thanks again, y'all. Get home safely. See you again soon.